3:17 a.m. My bare feet are on cold tile, and I am 11 years old, and I am holding a phone that is ringing through a wall. I can hear it, faint, 3 rooms away, like a pulse that isn't mine. 1 ring. 2. I count them against my own heartbeat because it's the only thing keeping me standing. She was 11 years old, 63 pounds, and the only person alive who knew the Korean mafia boss sleeping 3 rooms away was about to lose everything, and she'd been watching it happen for 6 weeks without saying a single word. Would you have stayed silent? By the end of this, you'll understand why silence can be the most violent choice a person ever makes. 3 rings. The tile is so cold I can feel it moving up through my ankles, into my shins, settling somewhere behind my sternum, like a second heartbeat, slower than mine, colder than mine, steadier. 4 rings. I didn't choose this hallway. I didn't choose this house, this city, this life with its locked doors and its men who arrive with envelopes and leave without making eye contact. I was born into the shape of all of it and spent 11 years learning where the edges were, which questions you don't finish asking, which rooms you don't enter after 10 p.m., which silences mean safety, and which ones mean something is already wrong. I learned young. You have to in a house like this. 5 rings. Here is what you need to understand before anything else. My father is not a man you call at 3:17 in the morning with a problem. My father is a man whose name means something in 3 cities on 2 continents, something that isn't printed anywhere, that doesn't appear on business cards or leases, or the name on my school enrollment forms. The woman who cleaned our house on Thursdays crossed herself every time she left. I noticed that when I was 7. I understood it by the time I was 9. I never spoke about it. 6 rings. And now, here is the part that will make you question everything you think you know about this story. I had known about the woman in his bed for 6 weeks, 42 days. I had watched her for 42 days and still almost didn't make the call. Almost. Her name was Yuna. And I want to tell you what she looked like, but that would be the wrong place to start, because what Yuna looked like didn't matter. What Yuna did, that's what I couldn't stop watching. She smiled the way people smile when they've practiced it, not fake enough to flag, not warm enough to trust. The warmth arrived in her hands first, the way she touched my father's arm across a dinner table, the way she poured his tea without being asked, and by the time it reached her eyes, something had already gone slightly wrong with it, like a translation that lost one word, one crucial word. I noticed this at week 2. I filed it away like a document I wasn't ready to open, and I kept eating my cereal. Here is what was happening while I watched and said nothing. Every Tuesday night, between 2 and 4 a.m., $4,300 left my father's accounts, not in one clean transfer, in pieces, distributed, quiet, the kind of movement that looks like operating costs if you're not looking closely. And my father, for the first time in 11 years of running a life that required looking closely at everything, had stopped looking. Because he was in love, or something shaped enough like love that he couldn't tell the difference. 14 transfers, over 4 months, $60,200 leaving in the dark while he slept with the unconsciousness of a man who believed he was finally safe. I watched it happen 3 Tuesdays in a row before I fully understood the architecture of what she was doing, and then I kept watching anyway.
This is the part I have to tell you, the part I'm most ashamed of. I wasn't waiting for more proof. I had proof by week 3, the routing number, the account, the pattern so clean it was almost elegant. I had everything my father would need to see what was happening. But here is the truth I sat with for 42 nights on a cold kitchen floor. I was terrified that he wouldn't believe me, not because he doubted my intelligence, but because I was 11 years old and motherless, and he had finally let someone in. And if I walked into his room with accusations, and he looked at me and saw jealousy instead of evidence, I would lose something I could never recover. Not just him, the version of him that still looked at me like I was worth protecting. So I waited. Not for him, for her. I needed her to dig the grave deep enough that there was no other explanation. I needed the evidence to be so absolute that my grief couldn't be mistaken for sabotage. I wasn't protecting my father. I was protecting myself. And I have never fully forgiven that 11-year-old girl for the calculation she made. She saw it. She knew, and she said nothing. Most people never realize that knowing something and acting on it are two completely different kinds of courage, and the distance between them is where people get destroyed. If this story is already pulling at something in you, if you've ever known something you weren't ready to say, don't leave before you find out what it cost her. Subscribe now, because what comes next is the moment this story stops being about Yuna entirely. And the next story on this channel will hit just as hard. You don't want to be unprepared. But here is the twist I didn't see coming, the one that rewired everything. I wasn't protecting myself from my father's disbelief. I was protecting myself from his belief. Because somewhere in those 42 days, I understood, without words, in the way children understand things they can't yet name, that if I brought him proof, he would believe me instantly. Not because he trusted me more than Yuna, because some part of him already knew, had already sensed the wrongness I was tracking, had chosen, conscious or not to look.
He needed me to look for him, and I almost let him keep needing that. Almost. Week 6, Thursday, 11:52 p.m. I was in the kitchen. I was invisible, the way quiet children learn to be invisible in houses where invisibility is a survival skill. A glass of water, the dark, the specific silence of a house that is never fully asleep. Yuna was on the phone in the hallway. Her voice was pressed low, not a whisper, which would have been obvious, but that particular register of someone who has learned to be private in shared spaces, practiced, controlled, and she said, "The girl is the problem. She watches too much. We need to move before she says something." I stopped breathing. Not dramatically, not the way people stop breathing in films. My body simply paused, like a clock someone put their hand over. We. One word. I held it up in the dark and turned it. We. Yuna wasn't freelancing. She was reporting. There was someone on the other end of that phone, someone who had given her instructions, set a timeline, defined the parameters of the operation, which meant the $847,000 wasn't the ambition, it was the salary, which meant my father wasn't being robbed, he was being positioned. And then the second thing landed, slower, heavier. The girl is the problem. She watches too much. They knew about me. Not just that I existed, not just that I was in the house. They had assessed me, factored me in, named me as a variable that needed to be managed before the operation could close. I had spent 6 weeks believing I was watching Yuna,
Someone had spent 6 weeks watching me watch her. My surveillance was never a secret. It was a known quantity, accounted for, built into a plan I had never seen and was only beginning to understand the edges of. And here is where the scope cracked open, and I saw the size of what was underneath. This wasn't one woman and one man and one house in one city. My father's name meant something in Seoul, in Lagos, in 3 specific zip codes in Los Angeles that I had heard mentioned in rooms I was not supposed to be standing outside of. The $847,000 moving in increments of $4,300, that wasn't the theft, that was the distraction, a financial irregularity designed to pull his attention inward, to make him audit his own accounts, question his own people, look at his own operation for the rot, while something else moved around him on the outside. Something that was already in motion, something that possibly had already arrived. Yuna said, "We need to move before she says something." Past tense framing, present tense urgency. They weren't preparing to move, they were already moving, which meant my call at 3:17 a.m. wasn't ahead of the plan, it was inside it. I called him at 3:17 a.m. 7 rings. I counted every single one of them against my pulse because I wasn't sure he would answer, and I was more terrified of what happened if he did than if he didn't. He picked up on the 7th ring. His voice was rough and immediate and stripped of every name he used in the daylight. The way dangerous men answer phones in the dark, not groggy, not startled, alert, like some part of him existed in a permanent state of readiness that sleep only thinned, never erased. I said, "She's stealing from you, and she's not alone." 4 seconds of silence, 4 full seconds where I counted my own pulse and heard nothing. Then, "Don't move, don't make a sound, I'm coming to you." And for 11 seconds, the 11 seconds between his voice and the sound of his door, I felt something I hadn't felt in 11 years. Like a child. Not like someone calculating evidence, not like someone who had spent 6 weeks managing a quiet investigation in a house full of things she was not supposed to know. Like a 63-pound girl in a dark hallway who had just said the scariest thing she had ever said out loud and now was waiting for her father to come. Just that, nothing else. 11 seconds. We've all imagined what we'd do if someone we loved was being used against us. We've run the scenario, told ourselves we'd act faster, speak sooner, be braver than the person in the story. But what do you do when you realize, in the middle of the action you thought was yours, that you might be the one being used? Hold that question. It matters more than you know right now. 3 men materialized inside the house in the next 4 minutes. I had never seen any of them. They moved with the silence of people who had been outside for hours, not arriving, but emerging, like they had always been there, waiting for a signal. My father moved through the rooms in a way I had never seen him move in the daylight. Not fast, deliberate, like someone who had tracked things that hide before and understood that speed was less important than precision. I stayed in the hallway. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. And then Yuna walked into the kitchen. She did not run. That was the detail that collapsed me. She did not run, did not raise her voice, did not reach for her phone. She sat down at the kitchen table, folded her hands in her lap, and lifted her chin to a level that I can only describe as prepared. My father stood across the table from her, and she looked at him, not with fear, with pity. The specific pity of someone who knows something the person in front of them does not yet know. the pity of someone watching a man discover in real time that the danger he thought he'd just survived wasn't the danger. Yuna wasn't the predator, she was the bait. She had been sent, specifically, deliberately, with instructions and a timeline and a salary disguised as a theft, to be caught, to be discovered by my father's alarm systems or his people or his instincts. The $847,000 wasn't the operation, it was the mechanism for pulling his gaze inward, tightening his world to the walls of his own house, making him look at his own operation for the rot, while the actual rot moved freely on the outside, in the space his distraction had cleared. Someone needed him looking at Yuna. Someone needed them not looking at them, and it had worked. My father looked across the kitchen at me, over Yuna's head, over the table, through the blue-gray pre-dawn dark, and I saw something in his face I had never seen there before. Not anger, not relief, fear. Not for himself, for me.
For what I had just stepped into by being exactly who I was, by watching, waiting, calculating, holding a secret for 42 nights, and then making a phone call at exactly the right moment. He was afraid of what this meant about me, and so was I. Only the people who stay until the end of this story understand what the right thing actually costs. Subscribe now, because the next story on this channel asks the same impossible question with stakes that are even higher. And you'll want to have been here for this one first, before that one finds you. Yuna was escorted out. The three men dissolved back into the dark the way they had arrived, not leaving exactly, receding. My father stood in the kitchen for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then he went to the cabinet, took out 2 glasses, filled them both with water from the tap, set one in front of me, sat down, and looked at me the way he looked at men he was negotiating with, not the way fathers look at daughters, the way he looks at someone's capabilities he is reassessing in real time. He wasn't proud of me, he was calculating me, and I felt it before I had the words for what I was feeling. "You did the right thing," he said. I have thought about those 5 words every single day for 3 years, because I heard them correctly, even at 11, even exhausted, even still half in the dark of the hallway where I'd been counting rings against my pulse. I heard what they actually meant. Not, "You protected me," not, "I'm proud of you," not even, "You were brave." He meant, "You are your father's daughter." And he said it the way you say something that has always been true, something you suspected, something you maybe feared, and have just now had confirmed. He wasn't closing the night, he was opening a door. And some part of me, the part that was still 11, still 63 pounds, still standing on cold tile counting rings, understood that walking through it was going to cost me something I hadn't finished valuing yet. The next morning, 4 people were gone. Not Yuna, not anyone connected to Yuna publicly. 4 others, names I didn't know then and have spent 3 years choosing not to look up. The accounts were never recovered, the investigation opened, and then quietly, efficiently closed. No arrests, no reports, nothing in any newspaper in the 3 cities where my father's other name means something. Just absence where 4 people used to be. Here is the question I couldn't stop asking myself in the weeks after that night. If they already knew about me, if whoever was running Yuna had factored me in as a variable, then why was I surprised by any of it? The answer arrived slowly, over days, like water finding the lowest point in a room.
I was never running an investigation. I was running a corridor that someone had already built for me. My watching, my waiting, my 42 nights of silence, my 3:17 a.m. phone call, all of it had been anticipated, accounted for, relied upon. I didn't blow the operation. I completed it. Could you have made that call, knowing or not knowing what it would set in motion? I genuinely want to know. Tell me in the comments, because the people who leave an answer to that question are the ones this channel was built for. He poured 2 glasses of water, not 1, 2. I have thought about that detail every single day for 3 years. The deliberateness of it, the second glass placed across the table from him without hesitation, as if he had always known on some level that this conversation was coming, that one day he would sit across from his daughter in the dark kitchen and negotiate, not father to child, but as something else, something without a clean name. 2 glasses before I said a word. 3 weeks after that night, I found a number. It was in a drawer I opened looking for a pen, a drawer in the study, the same room where the laptop had glowed blue the night this all started. A piece of paper, a number, Lagos area code. I recognized it, not because I had memorized it, because I had seen it once before, briefly, in the corner of a document that had been on my father's desk for 2 seconds before he'd turned it face down 2 years ago. I had read it in those 2 seconds without meaning to, filed it away in the part of my mind that stores things before I decide to know them. I stood in the study at 2:14 a.m. holding that piece of paper. I had 2 choices. Both had a cost I could calculate. Neither cost was survivable in the way I wanted to survive. I burned it. I went back to bed. I have never told anyone about the number. Not because I'm certain it was the right choice, because I'm not certain it was a choice at all. 3 weeks after that night, I opened my school locker and found an envelope. No name, no return address, slipped through the vent, which meant someone was inside the building or had access to someone who was, or never needed access because they always had it. Inside was a photograph. My father, aged 12 approximately, standing next to a woman with my jar, my eyes, my specific stillness, the particular quality of not moving that I had always thought was just a thing I did, a habit, a quirk, the way some people tap their fingers or look at the ceiling when they think. I had inherited it from her, my mother, who I had been told died when I was 3 years old. Standing in a city I had never been to, in a photograph dated 11 months ago. I never showed my father the photograph. I stopped eating cereal at 2 a.m. I stopped walking the hallways at night. I put the photograph in a place I won't describe, in an envelope I sealed myself, and I have not opened it since, because now I understood something I couldn't unknow. There was someone else watching, not Yuna's employer, someone else, someone who had access to a photograph taken 11 months ago of a woman who was supposed to be dead and who decided at a specific moment to make sure I knew they had it. They had been watching longer than anyone else, and they were watching still. 3:17 a.m., a phone ringing through a wall, 7 rings. I've told you now why I counted 7, not 6, not 8. 7 was the number I chose before I dialed, the number I gave myself as a limit. If he didn't answer by 7, I wasn't going to try again. I had a B plan. I have never told anyone what the B plan was. I'm not ready to tell you yet. You did the right thing, he said. 3 years later, I understand what he meant, not what I wanted it to mean, what he actually meant. He meant, you are already in this. You have always been in this. The only question that was ever open was whether you would act like it. And I had answered at 3:17 a.m. on the 7th ring, exactly on schedule. The 4 people who disappeared, I have spent 3 years not looking for their names, not because I'm afraid of what I'll find, because I'm afraid that when I find them, one of the names will tell me something about the night that I am not yet old enough to carry. Sometimes at 2 a.m., I still hear it, a phone ringing through a wall, 7 rings. I wonder who else has that number. I wonder if the woman in the photograph has it. I wonder if she was the one who left the envelope. I wonder, and this is the thought I cannot put down, the one that finds me in the specific dark between 2 and 4 a.m., that the call I made that night saved my father or delivered him. Some of you will say she did the only thing she could, that an 11-year-old girl with no mother and a father like hers had exactly one move and she made it, and what came after was never going to be her fault. Others will say, the moment she burned that paper, she made her choice, and it wasn't innocent. Drop your verdict below. I need to know where you stand, because this channel runs on people willing to sit with hard questions, and you've just proven you're one of them. If you're not subscribing yet, drop the words 7 rings in the comments. That's all, just that. I'll know what it means, and so will you. A 63-pound girl, a kitchen table, 2 glasses of water, and a father looking at his daughter like she is something he created without a blueprint, and something that has just quietly exceeded his calculations. He doesn't say anything else that night. Neither does she. The glasses sit between them, full and untouched,